A quick new idea, daily, from the world's greatest TEDx talks. I'm your host, Atossa Leoni, and this is TEDx Shorts. What leads people to put their jobs, reputation, and sometimes even their safety at risk in order to expose illicit activities by governments, companies, or institutions? Kelly Richmond Pope has spent years speaking with former whistleblowers to find out if there's a common trait linking the actions of these individuals. Kelly is a documentary filmmaker, fraud researcher, and associate professor at DePaul University. Today, she shares what she's learned from these courageous employees and argues we need to offer collective support and protection for individuals who speak up against unethical practices.
How many of us have ever seen something, thought that we should report it, but decided not to? And not that I need to see a show of hands, but I'm sure this has happened to someone in this room before. In fact, when this question was asked to a group of employees, 46% of them responded by saying that they had seen something and decided not to report it. So if you raised your hand or quietly raised your hand, don't feel bad. You're not alone. This message of if you see something, to say something is really all around us. Even when driving down the highway, you see billboards like this, encouraging us to report crime without revealing ourselves. But I still feel like a lot of us are really uncomfortable coming forward in the name of the truth. I'm an accounting professor and I do fraud research. And in my class, I encourage my students to come forward with information if they see it. Or in other words, encouraging my students to become whistleblowers. But if I'm being completely honest with myself, I am really conflicted with this message that I'm sending to my students. And here's why. Whistleblowers are under attack. Headline after headline shows us this. Many people choose not to become whistleblowers due to the fear of retaliation, from demotions to death threats, to job loss, perpetual job loss. Choosing to become a whistleblower is an uphill battle. Their loyalty becomes into question, their motives, their trustworthiness. So how can I, as a professor who really cares about her students, encourage them to become whistleblowers when I know how the world truly feels about them? So one day I was getting ready for my annual whistleblower lecture with my students, and I was working on an article for Forbes entitled Wells Fargo and Millennial Whistleblowing, What Do We Tell Them? And as I was working on this piece and reading about the case, I became outraged. And what made me angry was when I came to the fact and realized that the employees that tried to whistleblow were actually fired. And it really made me think about the message that I was sharing with my students. And it made me think, what if my students had been Wells Fargo employees? On the one hand, if they whistleblew, they would have gotten fired. But on the other hand, if they didn't report the fraud that they knew, the way current regulation is written, employees are held responsible if they knew something and didn't report it. So criminal prosecution is a real option. What's a person supposed to do with those type of odds? I, of all people, know the valuable contributions that whistleblowers make. In fact, most frauds are discovered by them. 42% of frauds are discovered by a whistleblower in comparison to other methods like management review and external audit. And when you think about some of the more classic or historical fraud cases, it always is around a whistleblower. Think Watergate, discovered by a whistleblower. Think Enron, discovered by a whistleblower. And who can forget about Bernard Madoff, discovered by a whistleblower? It takes a tremendous amount of courage to come forward in the name of the truth. But when we think about the term whistleblower, we often think of some very descriptive words. Rat, snake, traitor, tattletale, weasel. And those are the nice words, the ones I can say from the stage. And so this is a couple of stories that I want to share with you. So remember that Forbes article I was talking about that I was working on before my lecture? Well, I posted it and something really fantastic happened. I started receiving emails from whistleblowers all over the world. And as I was receiving these emails and responding back to them, there was a common theme in the message that I received, and this is what it was. They all said this: I blew the whistle People really hate me now. I got fired, but guess what? I would do it all over again if I could. It's important for us to cultivate hope. Whistleblowers are hopeful. Despite popular belief, they're not all disgruntled employees that have a beef with the company. Their hopefulness really is what drives them to come forward. We also have to cultivate commitment. Whistleblowers are committed, and it's that passion to that organization that makes them want to come forward. Peter Buxton was a 27-year-old employee for the U.S. Public Health Service. And he was hired to interview people that had sexually transmitted diseases. And through the course of his work, he noticed a clinical study that was going on within the organization. And it was a study that was looking at the progression of untreated syphilis. And so there were 600 African-American males that were in this study. They were enticed into the study through being given free medical exams, burial insurance. And so what happened through the course of this study is penicillin was discovered to help treat syphilis. And what Peter noticed was the participants in this study were not given the penicillin to treat their syphilis. And the participants didn't know. Peter tried to report and talk to his internal supervisors, but no one listened. And so Peter thought this was completely unfair, and he tried to report again and finally talked to a reporter. And in 1972, this was the front page of the New York Times. Syphilis victims in U.S. study went untreated for 40 years. This is known to us today as the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, and Peter was the whistleblower. What happened to the 600 men, you may wonder, the 600 original men? 28 men died from syphilis. 100 died from syphilis complications. 40 wives were infected, and 10 children were born with congenital syphilis. Who's to say what these numbers would be if it wasn't for the brave, courageous act of Peter? We're all connected to Peter, actually. If you know anybody that's in a clinical trial, the reason why we have informed consent today is because of Peter's courageous act. So let me ask you a question, that original question, a variation of the original question. How many of us have ever used the term snitch, rat, tattletale, snake, weasel, leak? Anybody? Before you get the urge to do that again, I want you to think a little bit. You might be the person that could shape history, or they could be the person that shapes yours.
The TEDx talk you just listened to was recorded at a TEDx event at DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois. All TEDx events are independently organized by volunteers who believe in TED's mission of ideas worth spreading. Special thanks to the organizing team at TEDxDepaulUniversity. Want to listen to more TEDx talks? Visit our website at ted.com/TEDxShorts. I'm Atossa Leoni. Thanks for listening, and see you tomorrow.